I mean, some pretty nice shots of like the citation from the flight simulator. A low visibility takeoff, like in stuff like this with thunder and lightning storms, depending on what weather, might cancel the flight on something like this. Probably won't see a rainbow that apparent or like that, but if you're flying, especially through rain showers or by rain showers, like I have seen rainbows, just something cool to look at, but it's unfortunately not gonna be that visually significant. Hi guys, my name is David Gregor, call sign Bronzino. I'm a lieutenant in the United States Navy. I'm currently stationed at Edwards Air Force Base in Southern California, flying the F-35C Lightning II. Today we're gonna take a look at Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. I've never played the game before, but this is the latest version, so let's take a look at it and see how realistic it actually is.
I'm gonna have to ask you to stand by 1 second.
So looking like the F-18, like intercepting a hot air balloon, just completely impossible. Hot air balloon's not gonna have the forward velocity that an F-18 is gonna be able to fly at slow enough. So F-18 is gonna just push way out in front. Like it might be able to do like a flyby, like a quick intercept, but it's not gonna be able to fly alongside. That's just not possible.
I'm getting so many good screenshots.
You got like something like a Top Gun scene here with like Maverick and Goose going inverted. We're not gonna even do this in like an operational squadron, like flying this close inverted to one another. You might have something like in the Blue Angels or Thunderbirds where they'll do this, but it takes a lot of practice and training.
Oh my God, he is bobbing under the ground. I see his tail.
Yeah, you can just like really poor physics and graphics here with the aircraft just descending into the runway. They're essentially doing like, it looks like a formation takeoff, and you'd only do that with like similar type of aircraft, not a fighter with the airliner. So like this is something that could realistically happen, like porpoising. So if you come down, or actually come down to land, if certain factors lead to a poor landing, like you will porpoise up and down the runway. When you touch on the runway, it's just gonna start skidding along the runway with a bunch of sparks coming out. Not necessarily the best thing. It's gonna take, it's gonna be pretty costly now to fix the aircraft.
We're going straight to the side of the cliff. Straight into the side.
You can tell way too low, shallow, because you're gonna impact the ground there. Yep, potentially you just killed yourself. Aircraft's gonna be absolutely destroyed. You're gonna come in on a more stable approach than that shallow approach. And if you're gonna take a wave off, just come around and land again. You're not just gonna commit to a bad landing, potentially destroy the airplane and kill yourself.
Decimator doing a ceremonial flyby right now.
You could have a real life situation where due to like various mistakes made, like you could be taking off on a runway and someone's coming into land opposite direction, but that's gonna be like an absolutely huge safety violation, not only with the FAA, but just like for your own well-being. I've known people who've come in to land on the wrong runway. The runway had changed opposite direction from when they took off to land. The person who did it failed the flight that they were on, and if you fail too many flights, like you actually fail out of flight school, so that you wanna like avoid at all costs. So this is a little bit more of a stable approach, at least looks like initially. He's on a little bit of better of a glide slope to come into land. So I was in the worst, kind of pretty close there, especially in a runway that's relatively short, and the end of the runway doesn't have anything that's gonna stop you, and looks like a cliff coming on the backside. So you're gonna do a lot more planning there, so you avoid that situation. You can just tell that this is just a larger aircraft, so it's gonna have a longer takeoff roll. Prior to every flight, you'll do takeoff and landing or told, so takeoff and landing data, and that's gonna give you how long your takeoff roll is gonna be, what speed you're gonna board to, because again, with larger aircraft, they're gonna accelerate slower, especially if they're heavier, and it's just gonna require more runway. So you can see like it's taking, like it's not as quick as a fighter jet to take off. I don't know how long this runway is, but it looks like it's pretty long. If you're flying a 747, you're probably not going to be on flight following. Flying VFR or visual flight rules, you'll usually be under IFR, which is instrument flight rules. So you'll be talking to an air traffic controller who'll be assigning you points to fly to along your route of flight, or give you a heading as well as an altitude to climb to. So flying in the weather, absolutely fine, especially in a larger aircraft like this. You'll have instruments and you'll have instrument navigation aids along the route of flight. See like relatively benign, normal landing here. Nothing too out of the extreme. As he's landing now, slowing down, you can take a look at the wings, and he's creating more drag. It's just gonna help the airliner, or the 737, decelerate quicker, so you're not using the brakes as much. It's gonna save life on the brakes. That's kind of the forward motion you feel in the aircraft as you land on an airliner. Like either reverse thrust, or as it's kind of throwing like speed brakes out into the air, it's gonna decelerate a little bit quicker, and you'll feel that when you land. Traveling pretty fast on the landing here. I don't know necessarily what aircraft it is or speed, but you can see the poppy lights on the left here, so showing him low. And now he's getting off runway center line. Looks like he's getting into like a PIO, or pilot-induced oscillations. Not necessarily a failed landing in that case. Just go around, take a wave off, come around again, execute a more stable approach, and hopefully a stable landing. If you're at like a civilian field or Air Force field or Navy field that doesn't have a ball, you'll have, in this case, poppies. So you can see on the left side of the runway, as you're pushing the runway, if you have 2 white, 2 red, that means you're on glide slope. Essentially like you're at a good height to land. And as you're coming in, now he's got Yep, now it nipples back to 2 white, 2 red, and now all white. So you can see way stable approach, or way more stable approach. He's on a better glide slope. He's on runway center line. Once you can reduce the amount of variables that you're trying to correct for, it's gonna be a lot easier to execute a safe and stable landing. Looks like you find some kind of airliner. He's got a weather radar up there, as well as electronic flight instrument display. Just gonna show kind of the aircraft's pitch, its speed, its altitude, its heading, etc. All right, so it's coming to land, looks like in London. So he's already configured for landing. You can see his gears down. It looks like his airspeed's at appropriate airspeed, or at least what I would assume for an airliner. It's just on a stable approach. He's on a steady descent. He looks like he's on runway center line. Right now, looking like he's set up for a stable landing. You can reference the PAPI lights again on the left side. So ideally you're looking for 2 white, 2 red. The more red you have, the lower you are. The more white you have, the higher you are. So right now you can see 3 white, 4 white. So he's getting a little high. Now he's back to 2 white, 2 red. So he's back on glide slope. He's at appropriate altitude or height. Looks like he's roughly on runway center line. Now he's getting fairly benign. So it looks like he's floating a little bit down the runway here. So touchdown a little bit late, but like something like an Airbus 320, not necessarily like the worst thing. You're gonna have that, a lot of airliners, you'll have reverse thrust to help slow you down. All right, so you can just see private jet flying just in cruise. I mean, some pretty nice shots of like the citation from the flight simulator. I've never actually been in the cockpit of one, but you can see that like it looks like it's at least rendered pretty well with the graphics. Like the displays they have up are relatively appropriate. You're gonna have up your EFI or electronic flight instrument display. And it looks like now he's coming to land, so you can see him getting configured, which is gonna get his gear coming down, his flaps coming down, which is gonna slow the aircraft for appropriate landing speed. A low visibility takeoff, like in stuff like this with thunder and lightning storms, depending on what the weather, might cancel the flight on something like this. I've taken off in bad weather, both from the boat or home field. That was just due to the mission dictating that we take off. But something where it's like training, maybe even like in commercial service or airline service, with like thunder and lightning storms this close to the airport, you're usually not gonna take off. You'll wait for it to pass over. Now, if you're airborne already, you'll just avoid it, but you can see very quickly he'll go into the weather, and stuff that you worry about would be like a lightning strike, which is not necessarily benign. It's not gonna bring down the aircraft, but you could start to lose electrical systems depending on what aircraft you're flying and what exactly happened to the aircraft. But taking off right into the weather is absolutely no factor. As long as you're able to conduct that takeoff roll and get airborne safely, you're gonna have an altitude that you're gonna be given from your clearance, and you'll be talking to approach and then eventually center if you're climbing up to a high enough altitude, who's gonna be able to provide you weather updates on your route of flight, and they'll be able to keep you climbing above any terrain. They'll also be able to provide any pilot reports from people who have flown through the area previously, and they'll be able to tell you, hey, if you get above this altitude, you'll get above the weather, so you'll get above the thunderstorm, and then you'll be fine. And you can see that it's kind of happening here as you're taking off. You start to see blue sky, and something like this where the thunderstorms are off to your left and you see blue sky to your right, you might deviate 10, 15, 20 degrees to the right now for weather. While that might add some extra time onto your flight and burn a little bit more fuel, it's just a safer thing to do. Probably won't see a rainbow that apparent or like that, but if you're flying, especially through rain showers or by rain showers, like I have seen rainbows, just something cool to look at, but it's unfortunately not gonna be that visually significant. Depending on like where you're flying, what part of the country or in the world, you might have like these various thunderstorm or rainstorm pockets, and that's where somewhere like, especially on an airliner with a weather radar, like you can help pick your way through, avoid the bad weather, or you can also rely on air traffic control with their radars to kind of give you vectors around thunderstorms, lightning storms, just bad weather in general. Even something like a 747 like this, they have plenty of power depending on their weight that you can see blue sky above those thunderstorms. So if you're climbing out on a transit or cruise as you're flying from one airport to another, you might just increase your altitude, do a quick climb in order to get above that weather. Not only for like just flying the aircraft, but for the passengers in the back, where now no one likes to be in their seat getting bounced around through turbulence. So if you can avoid that, you'll do so. Yeah, there's some like really like picturesque like in aviation moments that you'll have. I've had like sunset landings in San Diego or even like on the aircraft carrier or boat where it's just like an awesome moment where you're coming to land somewhere like in a cool location, like you're seeing here, like flying over the water and to like what looks like some kind of like island environment with mountains in the background. You have like the sunset in the background. It is cool experiencing it on the ground, but you have that extra kind of factor kind of as you're airborne, like doing your job, and you're also able to like take the moment to appreciate just like what like nature or the environment presents. And then you can just see like a steady landing, especially like on the boat. It's just a good landing. If you have bad landing, like especially on the boat, even if you had a good flight up into that moment, like your mood and kind of like your performance is going to be necessarily like ruined because of the landing. And then like on the boat, every time you're landing, you're being judged in the aircraft carrier from the LSOs or paddles. And then if it's at night, it's gonna be, or even daytime, it's gonna be broadcasted on one of the channels on the ship TV. So there's gonna be plenty of people watching you come to land. So not necessarily like high stress, but you're being judged every time you do so. Thanks for following along, watching Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 with me. I don't have much experience in commercial aviation or flying airliners. There are some carryovers between military aviation and commercial aviation. Overall, I would say that it's somewhat realistic. It's not as arcadey as some of the games. It is a flight simulator, so there's definitely some realistic takeaways to be pulled from the game. If you want to see more videos like this, you can head to the Gamology YouTube and Facebook pages. Take care. I'm trying to think of like something aviation specific.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I'm trying. Well, okay, I think I might. Would it be just like part of the intro, or? No, there's a movie quote that I'm trying to remember the exact.